My name is Ann Michael, and I've served for many years on the staff of the Lewis Center for Church Leadership, and I teach here at Wesley Seminary in the areas of stewardship and leadership. I've been asked to share with you on the subject of stewardship and finances. Few people enter ministry out of a desire to provide financial leadership, and yet, on their first day in the pastorate, most clergy find themselves in the roles of CEO and CFO of a small nonprofit organization. Many feel awkward discussing money or ill-prepared when dealing with financial matters. In fact, one of the things we know from surveys with Wesley Seminary's alumni and the Lewis Center's work with young clergy is that most entered ministry feeling woefully underprepared to lead in the areas of stewardship and finance. They ask, "Why didn't you teach us this in seminary?" Well, fortunately, we do teach it at Wesley Seminary, and I encourage you to check out our course offerings on congregational stewardship, church finances, and clergy personal finances, as well as resources you can find on the Lewis Center's website. But for now, let me name a few key practices and competencies that I believe are critical for anyone entering pastoral ministry or other types of church leadership. First, start with yourself and get your own financial house in order. You can't lead where you haven't gone yourself. So spend some time reflecting on your own attitudes toward money, your own patterns of spending, saving, debt, and giving. Do your personal financial practices model the type of responsible stewardship and generosity you would want to see among those you lead? If not, seek out the help of a financial advisor or enroll in a personal finance course such as Dave Ramsey's Financial Peace University. As one seminary student put it, "If I can't keep a budget, how can I instruct the church to keep a budget? If you're not tithing or giving sacrificially, how can you expect others to do so?" Clergy who have healthy personal finances are better equipped to lead a church toward healthy financial practices. In this area of responsibility, as in so many others, a church leader leads best by example. Second, get comfortable talking about money. In many congregations, there's a conspiracy of silence when it comes to money. Pastors don't feel comfortable talking about it, and parishioners don't want to hear about it. So, by unspoken agreement, everyone treats the subject as taboo. This attitude flows from a broader cultural norm that regards income and finances as highly private matters. Most people are uncomfortable talking about money even within their own family, much less within their church family. Yet this prevailing attitude that all matters concerning money must be highly private is inconsistent with what our faith teaches about money. Jesus talked about money more than any other subject except for the kingdom of God. For individual Christians and Christian congregations, the way we use money demonstrates our faith and values. The faith communities is expected to talk about money and giving because it's part of responsible discipleship. Effective ministry leaders have to learn to talk about money, and that includes developing the competency of asking for money. My colleague Lovett Weems suggests two simple principles that can change the tone of conversation around money in the church. First, never talk about people's money apart from their discipleship, and never talk about the church's money apart from its mission. It sounds so simple, and yet so often money talk in churches is something entirely different. It centers on budget shortfalls, unpaid bills, the boiler that needs repair. All of these things are important, of course, but not if you can't connect them to discipleship and the church's mission. Third, ground yourself in what faith teaches about money and giving. Presenting a comprehensive theology of stewardship isn't possible in this brief presentation, but I can tell you this. The Christian faith tells a wonderful, hopeful, inspiring story about a generous God who calls us to be generous, a God who promises not only to care for the sparrow, but to offer us abundant life, and a God who instructs us to manage these gifts carefully and responsibly by assuming the attitude of a steward. For those of us in ministry leadership, we have the privilege and the responsibility of helping people see resources and possessions through the lens of faith, rather than through the cultural lenses of acquisitiveness and scarcity thinking. Congregations with strong cultures of generosity saturate their preaching, prayers, and worship with references to God's generosity, gratitude, and giving as acts of faith. Week in and week out, they use the vocabulary of faith to underscore the connection between faith and generosity, not just during the offering, not just on Sunday morning, but using the lens of gratitude, generosity, and stewardship to frame every aspect of congregational life. Fourth, master the basics of budgeting. Everyone is familiar with the concept of a budget, of course, whether it's the family budget or the federal budget. The most basic function of a budget is to keep track of income and expenses. But just as importantly, a church budget is a decision-making framework for aligning resources with missional priorities and a tool of financial accountability that can be used to monitor a church's financial health. If you're lucky, you've worked with budgets in the past and know how to read a financial statement. You don't need to be a CPA to become fluent in the basics of church budgeting. But if you're like me and numbers and line items aren't your native language, you may want to seek out a wise mentor or find a long-term financial leader in your church who can explain the church's approach to budgeting. While every church has its own idiosyncrasies when it comes to budgeting, regardless of your denomination or your polity, in virtually every church, the work of drafting a budget and monitoring the budget throughout the year rests with the Finance Committee. And the Finance Committee reports to the church's governing body, your board, your church council, your vestry, your session, whoever is responsible for giving final approval to the budget. The Finance Committee then shares updates with the governing body throughout the year, usually in the form of a financial report showing actual income and expenses in relation to the benchmarks established by the budget. The Lewis Center has some great resources you can lean on if your congregation needs help in putting a budget together. For now, though, let me name just two important points. The first pertains to a church's annual operating budget. It should be funded by recurring and relatively predictable sources of income, such as pledges, offerings, a portion of rental income, fundraisers, and so forth. Churches should avoid funding their operating budgets with non-recurring and unpredictable sources of income, such as large one-time gifts, bequests, the proceeds of the sale of property, or over-reliance on an endowment. These sources of revenue for operations simply delays the day when the gap between recurring income and recurring expenses must be addressed. Many churches develop a separate budget for capital expenses, something called a capital budget or a building fund. Income from the non-recurring sources of revenue I just mentioned can be used more fruitfully for a capital fund, since capital projects have a lifespan longer than 1 year. When a church only considers their spending needs using a 12-month annual budget, longer-term needs such as building maintenance and repair often go unfunded, resulting in deferred maintenance and poor stewardship of physical assets. A capital budget can help a church avoid falling into this trap. Fifth, a key leadership skill in the realm of stewardship and finances is an unwavering commitment to practices that ensure financial integrity. Maintaining financial integrity is critical to every organization. Without practices to assure honest, transparent, and proper financial practices, an organization quickly forfeits the trust of its constituents and donors and jeopardizes its ability to carry forth its mission. Sadly, the church is not immune from damaged integrity. In fact, in 2017, Christianity Today reported that 1 in 10 Protestant churches experiences some type of embezzlement. Many church leaders play critical roles in ensuring that church finances are handled appropriately, including the governing board, the finance committee, and the pastor. They set the tone for the rest of the congregation, and so it's critical that they remain engaged in ongoing review and guidance of church finances. In some churches, particularly smaller churches, there may be a tendency to think everyone has the highest ethical ideals and best of intentions, so all the standard rules of handling money need not apply. But anyone involved with the church's money should insist that proper protocols are in place to protect themselves from temptation and the possible appearance of impropriety. Sixth, embrace the church's call to foster generosity. Congregations can have revenue from a variety of sources, but the vast share of support for congregations comes from individual donations. In fact, in 40% of churches, donations are the only source of funding for their budgets. So, encouraging people to give is an important part of ministry leadership. Ministry takes money, and there's no shame in asking for it. And thinking how best to encourage generosity will likely be a part of your ministry from day one, whether it's leading the congregation in a weekly time of offering, conducting an annual stewardship campaign, or seeking major gifts. Again, the Lewis Center has lots of resources to help you cultivate generosity. But it's wrong to start from the premise that the reason that Christians should give is merely to fund the church's ministry. The call to generosity is much, much more than a fundraising plan for the local church. Sustaining our faith institutions is critically important, of course, but it's not an end unto itself. God's purpose in calling us to lives of faithful stewardship and generosity isn't merely to sustain the church. In fact, I believe it's the other way around. The continued existence of the church is essential to sustain the powerful, transformative message of our faith regarding how we are to live in relation to money and possessions. Biblical generosity and responsible stewardship are the instruments that God uses to counteract greed and scarcity and bring forth abundant life for all God's people. Generosity is a means of bringing forth the kingdom. You know, for a lot of people in ministry, stewardship and finances, like evangelism, they're hold-your-nose subjects. You know that it has to be done, but it makes you feel uncomfortable. But when we come to appreciate the connection between money and faith, when we come to understand the role of generosity in God's economy, we see that the work of finance committees and stewardship committees, treasurers, trustees, and even pastors in managing church resources and cultivating generosity, it's holy work. It's a calling. It's a ministry that matters to church members seeking to steward their resources faithfully. It matters in determining the church's ability to fulfill its mission. Moreover, it's been my experience that those willing to step up to the challenging task of leading in the realm of stewardship and finances do so because they love God and are deeply committed to the mission of God's church. So my prayer is that you'll be one of those leaders and that this information will give you a good start.